Uh, this video is about making a geospatial biography. Uh, it will utilize Google's timeline. I will demonstrate some Python scripts, and I'll show you the visualization in Flourish Studios. By the end of this tutorial, you would be able to make a project like this. Now, the motivation behind the idea is basically I want to utilize the timestamps and latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates to come up with a geospatial biography. So I'm not exactly sure what the final outcome will look like, but perhaps it might get some interesting response or insights of what it could possibly look like. So I'm basically experimenting around with design decisions, some corner cases, some new problems to address. So I'll make it into a tutorial which would be useful for developers, analysts, journalists, or anyone interested in the idea of a geospatial biography. And I'll timestamp some concepts in the description section. So brief overview. So the data source here is Google Takeout. I'll do the data prep using some Python scripts, and I'll do the data viz as a 3D map in Flourish Studios. This would be an accurate version. So Google Timeline, if you guys haven't used it before, it's basically when you use Google Maps, it records some of the data. It records the place visits, and it records the activity segment. So place visits would be your house to some other location that you went to. So point A and point B, basically. The activity segment is basically what mode of transport did you take, which streets you took to get to that location, and the total kilometers you traveled. It also has stuff like, okay, did you take a bus? Did you bike it there? Did you walk it there? So all of this data, basically, you've seen it visually in Google Timeline or in Google Maps. It gets it, the data is gathered through GPS in your phone or your devices when they connect to Wi-Fi. So there's a bunch of sources there. So the location history service. Now, there's multiple formats that you can select. So this is the semantic location history, which consists of inferred place visits and activity segments from timeline. And we're going to press OK. And we're going to do next step, and then I will tell you to just to download via email. You can set export once, and then create export. Now this takes a bit of time, and what you get is basically an email in Gmail, where you just open it and it will download a file like this. So you can extract it. And you get your location history and all of the years since you've been using the service. So I've owned an Android device since 2014, and it presents the JSON files, which look something like this. Okay, now when you open the file, when you open the JSON file, you get two pieces of information. You get the place visits and you get the activity segment. So for this tutorial, you just need the place visits. So it's going to be a really long file. So some months might be like 10,000 or 20,000 lines of code. What you're basically doing is extracting some key pieces of information from here. Now, the first one is latitude and longitude E7. So it's basically this. It's basically your geographical coordinates, and they're used as an exponent of 7. So it's basically you don't have the decimal at the second or third spot. The reason for this is that it gets you really precise coordinate information down to like the house level or like the building level. Uh, and it avoids like a float point error accuracies. Timestamps are precise down to a millisecond precision. The place address is basically your location address, city, postal code, and country code, country address. Place name can be labeled if it's a public place. So parks, restaurants, some offices, uh, and residential addresses are left blank because Google doesn't really know who lives where. For them, it's just an address. Um, Now, the last portion is location and visit confidence. So it's doing something fancy with using machine learning to predict where you might have gone. So you might be in like a strip mall, and then there might be like 6 or 7 different stores around you. So it's using some machine learning to predict exactly where you went. So these are inferred visits. So these aren't always accurate, but it keeps on getting better, basically. Now, the next step is the Python scripts. Now, basically, after the Google timeline step, what I will be doing is I will be parsing through 120 JSON files. So one file per 12 files per year, and then there's 10 years, so that gives us 120. After that, what I'll do is I'll merge it into one CSV, and after merging it, I'll clean that CSV, and then the cleaned version can then be filtered to give multiple visual CSVs so that I can put it into Flourish. This is like the high level overview of the Python step. Okay, uh, so I have 4 Python scripts. The first one would be using operating system libraries to basically create folders and directories, and it would just rename the files. The second one will basically extract the relevant columns from all of the files and put it into one CSV. In the cleaning script, what I'd be doing is correcting for text encoding issues, or if my data set has non-ASCII data, it's going to deal with that issue. The filtering step is basically what are the columns that are necessary to be put into Flourish. So these are 4 distinct scripts, and okay, so now I'm going to demo the project, the Python stuff basically. So I've written the Python script in such a way that every year or 2 years I basically download the Google Takeout and run the script, and it should work. So what I'm doing is I'm extracting like the original Takeout, and in this what I'll do is I will place my scripts over here, and I'll run the 4 scripts. So, and I'll show you what each of them is doing. So I'll open the script. So the first one is basically creating a file directory and renaming the JSON files, and then it's putting all of the JSON files into one directory. So it's processed 115 JSON files and it's put it in a specific directory. And what that looks like is this. And it contains all of the JSON files. And they're named by year, underscore, and the name of the month. Now this step is useful for the next script. So in the next script, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge it and put a file over here. So script number 2 is the JSON script. Now what I'll do is run this script, and what it's doing is going through every year and putting it into a data frame, and then finally exporting the data frame into a merge.csv file. Now we have a file over here. So if we open it, it contains all of the JSON information into all of the JSON data is now in a CSV file format. So some of the issues that I would be addressing in the next script are something like this. So Popeyes, for example, um, has a copyright or a trademark symbol, which isn't basic ASCII characters. Bon Appetit in Davis Center is another example. So there's a handful of examples over here. And then there's examples where so the next script would deal with this portion, the cleaning portion of this. Now there's also another thing where there's blank places. Now these blank places are basically residential addresses. So that's another thing that needs to be taken care of. So the third script, called clean script, will deal with these information. So it's just going to take these symbols, and then another example is like the word cafe has the E with the symbol on top. So now I'm going to run the third script. Now it updated the place names. It dealt with the total number of rows that were changed. And finally we get a clean script, which will deal with issues like these. Now this needs to be done so that everything is in UTF-8 text encoding scheme, just so that it's good for different pieces of software. Okay, now the final script. Is your visual script. Now this basically does some simple extraction of information. So I'm basically extracting all of the common cities for the purpose of labeling in the visualization. So when I run this script, it produces the final CSV that we can just put into Flourish, and it will work. In this, what I'm using is, all I need is the latitude information. The latitude information is down to 7 decimal points, latitude and longitude. I have a start date, so initially I was doing precise down to milliseconds, but that isn't really good for visualization over a span of 10 years. So only the day is a good indicator over there. And then I'm using the city, which is basically extracting the list of cities and just labeling it. So some smaller cities, for example, Thornhill or Etobicoke, I just placed them as like others, even though they're big cities, but in my data set there aren't that many of them. So I just want like the most popular cities that I've visited in my data set. So now this is basically ready for the visualization step. Okay, now this is basically an overview of some of the concepts that were used to write the scripts. So the first one's the use of relative paths, so that I could take the takeout and place it in anywhere, and my scripts would run because they're using relative paths. You can use things like regular expressions to identify certain texts, consistent naming conventions. The next one is text encoding. Now, I have addresses from Pakistan which use like Urdu characters or foreign characters, and in order to properly open the file, I had to use like Latin 1 encoding to sort of open the file. And then what I did was I put in breakpoints to sort of identify what was going in, and then make the necessary replacement in the script. Try catch and error handling comes in handy because every time I'm opening files and closing files. Date time formats are another place where it gets tricky. So the first two files didn't use any external libraries. So I think the third and fourth script used the pandas library. It was basically for dealing with date and time and doing matrix manipulation, either column level or row level manipulations. Another concept was you can use tuples to keep track of count with the data frame or data series being processed. So these are some of the concepts that I came across in this project. Cleaning script. So just wanted to elaborate a little bit on Latin 1. So it's text encoding. Uh, so not all the symbols used, like for example, this is like an address in like Korea, and it has like foreign characters. So based off of where you live, uh, you might need to handle those. Um, yeah, so these are the two. This is the stuff that I identified in the cleaning script. Uh, what I did was I just basically replaced those symbols with an empty string. Yeah, it doesn't always work well, but it's at least I know that the data set is in English or is in UTF-8 encoding. Uh, okay, now the steps in Flourish Studio. So Flourish Studio is basically a visualization software, and it's very comprehensive for making graphs, charts, maps of all kinds. It's really elaborate, and it's really well uh, documented, and it's really intuitive to pick up. Uh, I want to do a more comprehensive video about Flourish once I precisely know what the end product would be. I tried recording a few tutorials or steps, but it's like a design thing, and it's really hard to put visual design uh, concepts into like a step-by-step tutorial. So I'll just go over like the rough steps that I usually take. So the first step is to select a 3D map. Then you roughly load the data. Uh, then you connect the data and you configure the maps. Now, these 4 steps are different for different visualizations, and it takes a bit of time to kind of get it to exactly what you want. But one of the things is that if you understand the tabs on the side and what they do, then it becomes pretty straightforward. So I'll just demo one variation that I worked on using my data set, and then maybe in a few months, once I know what the biography would look like, I'll do a more detailed video on the steps that I took. Okay, so uh, this is a demo of what the visualization looks like. Now, this is basically a heat map of points, and it labels which city I was in at different times during. Now, since I've used latitude and longitudinal coordinates down to 7 decimal points, what it does is basically you can zoom in at different levels and shade the map accordingly. So I could have also used a point map and represented this as a point, but I just wanted to use something that is useful for not just the city level, but like more in terms of like, you know, visualizing southern Ontario as a whole. Now, this is basically counting the cities that I've visited. Now you can zoom back. So I went to Pakistan, I think, in 2018. So there would be a few dots on around Pakistan. Yep, right there. So it's not just one whole thing. It's because it's spanning through like a month really fast. It's going to show it all at once. The reason for labeling those as others is because there's a constraint as to how many cities I want over here. Um, so I've labeled smaller towns as others, and yeah, that's what it looks like. So as you saw in the demo that I am roughly 70% uh, at the point where I have the information needed to make the geospatial biography, but I'm not exactly sure what makes a good biography, what makes an entertaining biography. Should it be accurate? Should it be fictional? Um, what events are important? Because uh, there's a bit of labeling work that is required. Um, Another consideration is like, uh, you know, whose biography would be interesting. There might be some professions that are more interesting than others, where your work might require you to travel a lot more. Um, so there's a bit of shaping the story aspect, which I'm trying to figure out, and therefore I wanted to make this as a tutorial so that other people could explore this idea and maybe uh, work on their own life story. Or uh, yeah, so there's a lot of different variations that can be made here. So uh, I'm open to ideas, and um, uh, you can comment in the section below saying what might be good considerations for a project like this. Um, and hopefully within a few months, I'll release something that I think would be interesting. Thank you for your time.